Excited to be here with you today. As Allison said, my background, almost 20 years of it now, is all in research. So I started my career working for a very small market research firm, actually in Washington, D.C., where I learned all the ins and outs of fielding surveys, recruiting for focus groups, and coding open-end responses, all sorts of things that kind of go into the inner workings of research. And then went to Heinz, where I got to work on new product development, communications development, packaging design research, kind of the whole gamut. You know, they have a portfolio of products and many different end users of those products. So learned a lot about research there. And then, as Allison said, I shifted to sort of the external supplier side, where that was much more high level macro research, looking at how societal changes, technological changes, economic impact of what's happening in the world is impacting consumers and their choices, and specifically how they're eating and drinking has been my focus. But really looking kind of more at those broad macro trends and trying to understand attitudinally and behaviorally what's shifting then with consumers based on those things. And that is, of course, very interesting work, I think. And then now it's been about a year. I'm at Schmidt Market Research here, and happy to be back kind of local to Pittsburgh. About 50% of our clients and our business is based here in Pittsburgh. So it's nice to be able to get out and about a bit more. I was remote for like 8 or 9 years. So happy to be back based in Pittsburgh again. So that said, that journey is kind of 20 years of experience with very different research needs, different projects I've worked on. The through line is always this kind of customer discovery. What can we learn from customers to better guide business decisions? And at what stages do we need to talk to customers to shape our decisions and to have some of that input so that we feel really confident about what it is that we're doing with the business? So my goal today is to talk to you a little bit about customer discovery, talk about what it is, sort of pull back the veil or mystique, if there is any, about talking to customers and what you can learn from them, why it's important, and also give you some practical tips for just getting out there, getting started on collecting feedback. I don't know, I think everyone's in a different place maybe with their journey and what they're doing here today, but there are some practical tips that hopefully make customer discovery pretty approachable and something that feels like you can take action and go out and do. So that's my goal. And I wanted to just start with that. What is customer discovery? What are we talking about today? I've used the word research several times. The idea is to just understand needs, understand problems, understand desires of potential customers. Sometimes it's existing customers if you're working with a customer base already and you're improving products or launching new products for them. And the idea is to inform the entire go-to-market strategy. It's about product development, service development, on that front end side of things. How can you make those things stronger and more appealing to your end user eventually? And also about the go-to-market strategies. Maybe you, through this process, learn a different way to talk about what it is you're doing that's more to your user's language. Maybe you learn a way to talk about it that's most compelling, something that really hones in on the benefits so that they understand what's in it for them and why they might be interested in your product or your service. So that's kind of the high level. This is what customer discovery is all about. It's about research. And I like this quote because I think, again, one of my goals is to talk about this in a very approachable and actionable way. And research is formalized curiosity. I think you're all probably curious about what it is that you're working on. That's kind of what brings you here today. You might already have questions, and research is kind of a way of just formalizing that. It's a way of poking and prying. But before you do, you kind of set up your purpose, what it is that you're poking and prying for. I'm sure as students, you've all spent a lot of time poking and prying on different things, and that is much more effective if you can be a little bit focused with it in the first place. I can remember, many times writing research papers and things that were less focused, and there was a lot of poking and prying that went very broad and didn't necessarily go in the right direction. So we'll talk a little bit about the objective and how it can make your curiosity a sort of focused poking and prying when you go to do customer discovery. So the importance of customer discovery, there are a lot of companies, especially consumer-focused companies in the CPG world, or companies like Amazon or Apple, who, Bezos and Bill Gates and Microsoft, they talk about the importance of keeping the customer at the center of everything they do. And that is how they make the decisions they make to, make sure that what they're doing is going to be appealing at the end of the day and that they'll have a large group of users who are interested in it. So it's about uncovering needs, it's about identifying opportunities, making sure that within the scope of the market, those things are wanted and needed. It's also about mitigating risk wherever possible. There are times when decisions require investment. This is a chance to mitigate the risk of that investment by learning first what people might think about that direction that you're taking. So that can help you, of course, with decision making. And then better understanding competition. Even if you feel really confident in your own idea, your own service, where you're going with that product, understanding how that fits into the competitive set from a customer perspective can be really eye-opening. Sometimes there is a big hole and there's not a strong competitive set that's meeting the needs that you might be trying to meet. Other times there might be some competition there. There's somebody already doing something well. And through customer discovery, you can learn what is it that people are already using? What are they doing today to solve the need that I'm trying to come in and solve? And then enhancing credibility. This goes both ways. When you engage in customer discovery, when you get those insights and you do that research, you can both enhance your credibility with your customers. They might feel like, oh, this, you really get me. This product, the service was delivered and built with me in mind. So it enhances credibility at the end of the day with customers. And also, if you're in the position where you need to share what you're doing with a team, a boardroom, a group of investors, even just, your partners on a research project, it is a chance to say, I know that this is the right direction because I researched it and this is what we found, and it sort of supports what I want to do. So enhancing credibility is one of the key goals of customer discovery as well. What it's not the final decision. So this happens a lot in the corporate world where there can be kind of this decision paralysis and wanting to just wait for the research, wait for the next, something to come in before making that call. And sometimes those decisions need to be made and research is a factor in that. And just like anything else, there are many factors that go into that decision. So it's not the final decision. It's not the only factor that you're applying when you're making decisions. And it's not a substitute for your judgment. There are many instances when you know what it is you're trying to do, you know your product, you know your offering or your service, and you have a sense of what you want people to know about it. And sometimes research, isn't there to say like to totally contradict that. You might come to a spot in the road where you feel like it's contradicting your own judgment, but that might be a chance to just kind of reframe the way you're talking about it or which benefits exactly you're speaking about so that, you can kind of trust your judgment and also move forward with that, with your offering. And also not an afterthought. Wherever possible, if you can be proactive about putting this into practice, thinking about it early, thinking about it often throughout the stages, wherever you have those questions, making sure that you're building in the time as possible to go out and do that customer discovery work, as opposed to after the fact where you're pretty far along the road, you've already got everything in place, you know what it is you're doing, a lot of the details are all fleshed out, and then it's like, hey, maybe we should ask people what they think about this. So the afterthought, that happens a lot, but wherever possible, the proactivity is really the best approach. So speaking of that, when to do research, when to engage in customer discovery, it's really, like I said, kind of early, it's often, it's throughout the whole process. It really depends on your goals, your objectives. And if you find yourself saying, I really wish I knew the answer to this, then it's probably a good indicator that it's time to engage in customer discovery. And to give a little more detail, at the exploratory phase, this is by its very nature, very wide open, very a chance to listen for those unmet needs. Maybe you're validating some hypotheses. You already think you know something about how people are getting their products in XYZ category, but this is a chance to go out and find that out, ask people. Also learning about customers' lives, the context in which they're making the decisions that you are trying to be a part of. Like I said, sometimes understanding that competitive set is really eye-opening. They might be doing something that's a real workaround and you have a more direct solution for that workaround. They might be, already pretty satisfied in some ways, but there's one gap that you've identified by talking to people about what they're currently doing. So understanding that full landscape through the exploratory research can be really helpful. And then further down the path, once you are already working on something that's a bit more defined, the customer discovery can come into play to really develop and refine. So you can try this out, you can try that out, you can put some ideas in front of people, you can bring stimuli to something like a focus group and say, here's what I'm thinking about, this is what it looks like, and is that working for the customer or the potential customer? What do they think about that idea? I'll give you some more examples of exactly what questions to ask when you're trying to go through that development and refinement period. This is, of course, a little bit more narrow than that first exploratory phase, but again, there's a lot to be gained by doing customer discovery and research here to understand what's nice to have, what's need to have, what you might want to focus on going forward. And then finally, at the optimized stage, there are always kind of those tweaks, those ways of making something just a little bit better. This is a good chance to kind of fine-tune communication of benefits. If you've got the product or service where you think it needs to be based on what you started with the exploration, what you've done with your developing and refining of that, you feel like it's in a pretty good place, and you need to know how to talk about it. You need to make sure that people understand exactly what it is that it's offering. This is something that comes into play in optimization, just improving those final tweaks and enhancing using customer feedback. Sometimes there's prototypes to use here. There's kind of something to test out, and you can say, does this work? Does this not work? You can get kind of that not last minute, but that kind of optimized feedback once something's pretty further along. So, keys to successful research, whether you're looking at that exploratory kind of front end phase, whether you're further down the line in terms of development, whichever kind of research you're doing, the key is starting with the objective. This is where that like poking and prying with a purpose comes into play. If you can articulate ahead of time what it is that you want to get out of the research, you will set the research up to help so much with that outcome. Keep it focused, keep it actionable, make sure that it's not kind of cramming, 5 or 6 things into one sort of project that you may be trying to do. And other ways to kind of get to that objective and other factors to think about when you're setting up the research. Define what success looks like. That'll help you think about, what am I really trying to get out of this? What's my key objective? If you think about what success looks like and set clear goals there. So when I think about what success of a research project looks like, sometimes it's helpful to think in headlines or like an elevator pitch. Like if I came out of that research and I could say that I ran into someone on my team and I could say, here's what we learned, XYZ, or we watched people cook in their kitchen and they all added a lot of veggies before they started making their pasta sauce. And so now we know that we need to kind of enhance the pasta sauce in a different way to help them with that step so they don't have to do it. So if you can kind of think about the output and what anyone that you'd want to tell would be interested in learning and what they would do with that. So the next part, just think about the action to be taken. When you're thinking about setting up the objective, you can also think about, if I knew blank, then I could make this decision. I could go forward with this next step in the project. So it kind of helps you think about, what it is exactly that you want to learn. And if you take that away, then that would be considered successful in terms of your research goals. I will also say, if you are stumped on writing your research objective, you need help refining, ChatGPT is a helpful resource. You can go and say, I'd like to do some customer discovery. I'm at the exploratory phase. What are some classic objectives? You will have to refine it with ChatGPT. It's not perfect the first time around, but there are lots of suggestions in there that might spark some ideas and help you kind of further define what it is that you're trying to do. So another way to think about the objective, as I said, kind of you want to make sure you have that nailed down in the first place so that the output is taking you further along in your process and you know what to do with it before you even go into the project. So a lot of times you will have a business objective in mind because you're already thinking in those terms. So you might be thinking, this is the problem that we need to solve to move forward. If we knew this answer, we could make this decision. We would do this instead of that, or we would add this benefit, or we wouldn't have to focus on this benefit and we could just scrap it. So if there's a sticking point that's preventing a decision, again, it's a good indicator that it could be a good point in time to do customer discovery. And you can kind of translate that into research objectives. So what knowledge would help to solve it? Thinking about that problem the company's trying to solve, where you're stuck, where you're kind of spinning your wheels, then what knowledge, what if you could ask somebody who's a customer or potential customer of yours, what would you ask them? What knowledge would fill that gap for you? If we knew that, then we could move forward. A lot of text here. Kind of wanted this to just have this as a leave behind, to just say when you're approaching customer discovery, you will have both qualitative and quantitative methods at your disposal. Qualitative is often thought of as kind of the more colorful side of the equation. It's where you get a lot of the context. It's where if you're asking, why are people doing this? Or why are they going to this solution? Why does anyone choose that competitor? Anytime you're asking questions about why, you're thinking, a lot of times the output is something qualitative because you really need to understand the underlying reasons, and qualitative is really good at doing that. On the other hand, if you're asking how many people are using that software right now, how many people already or cook dinner on a given night, how many people use pasta sauce, those types of things are, you're looking for a number, of course, with how many, what are the options out of these competitors, and you kind of want to see how big the pie is, those types of things, you're going to go for something that's giving you numerical data. And either one, you can get involved at any stage. So this is not black and white, but oftentimes the qualitative comes into play in the early stages when you're doing that exploration, when you're trying to understand what does the market look like today, what are the behaviors that customers are already engaging in, where would a product that we might be interested in developing kind of fit into their lives and what they're doing. The other thing on the qualitative side is when you're on that development, if you can do qualitative research to get feedback and quickly kind of iterate on the feedback that you're getting, make some changes, get back out there. Qualitative can be really useful for that. Quantitative, very useful when you're validating those things that you've already learned. You want to understand, was it that one person who told me that, or is that something other people also believe and agree with? Sometimes, qualitative is helpful to make quantitative so that you can understand, was that one focus group that had that same opinion? Was there groupthink going on, or is there a larger market out there that also feels the same way? So on the qualitative side of things, some of the most common methodologies, in-depth interviews, focus groups. These are, sort of questions, open-ended questions and answers from customers. Quantitative, closed-ended questions, you're using surveys. There are lots of tools out there now, things like SurveyMonkey. Most of them have pretty helpful design suggestions. If you say I need to ask a purchase interest question, how interested would you be in purchasing this product? They'll give you a 5-point scale with the purchase intent. Definitely would not buy, definitely would buy. So there are free tools out there to help with those things now. And I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into qualitative research because it is sort of the, at that more exploratory phase, and one of the first things that you can do to gather customer feedback and to gather and start this customer discovery journey. And it's also very approachable. It can be very affordable depending on who it is that you want to talk to and, how long you have to do that and all these things. But it can be rather informal to get a group of potential customers around a table, or even, one-on-one, kind of go out and talk to people about services or offerings or questions about how they're doing things today. So I wanted to share some practical tips for qualitative research, given that role that it could play in entrepreneurship. One of the things, as I mentioned, qualitative is all about the open-ended questions. And it can be very natural to start questions with a, do you think? And then that could just be a yes, I do think, or no, and they don't necessarily have to give you any more information than that. So better to start things with a, tell me some of the reasons that you decided to do this. Think about how you're phrasing that so that it is truly open-ended. Even if I'm not asking a yes or no question, it still might be a question that leads to just a one answer or another. So it might be close-ended. The other thing that's pretty natural to do is to put a part of the question in the answer. So I have an example of that on the next slide. But we might just kind of get ahead of ourselves and say, is it because of this or is it because of that? And, you're sort of already filling in for the person you're talking to what their thoughts might be. Better to just keep it short, keep it crisp, cut off any of those answers you might be putting in the question. Make sure you're asking one question at a time. And also, this is a big one that will just really change the customer research that you can do is don't use why if you can help it. This is a very natural follow-up question. If someone says they do something this way, or they never buy this product, or you might say, why? That's a very natural response. And it tends to put people on their toes and they kind of feel like they have to defend what they just told you. If you think about it conversationally, if your roommate gets home and you're like, why were you out late? As opposed to being like, what have you been up to? Like you're both kind of trying to understand what are the reasons that you weren't home earlier, but one of them seems more like I'm accusing you, you were out late, I want to know why. And the other one seems a little more like you're just asking what I was up to, and I'm going to tell you now the reasons that I was late today. So whenever possible, instead of following up, when you hear something that you want to probe on and you think like, oh, that's really interesting, I'd like to know more about that, you could just train yourself to use some of these probes instead. Like, what are some reasons? Or help me understand. Please tell me more about. When I first started moderating, I would just kind of have these in my back pocket and just a simple probe of, oh, tell me more about that kind of gets you to the same place as a why, but it doesn't come across as sort of quite as something they have to defend. It doesn't come across why sort of puts people in a more rational space. And they think like, what are the logical reasons that I could give this person to tell them why I said that versus like a tell me more about, they might say, something a little bit less, something more emotional might come into play. So to give you an example of that, the first one is doing a couple of those things. What do you like best about grocery shopping? Is it the coupons or the fact the store is open 24 hours? You might think like those are the greatest things about it. Clearly, those are probably your favorite things too. And then also, what do you like least about grocery shopping? And when you kind of stick it all in there, the person you're talking to has to decide where to take that first. And you'd be surprised at, how much information you'll get with a short, crisp, just tell me some things you like about grocery shopping. And also, even better to say, tell me some things you like about grocery shopping as opposed to what do you like about grocery shopping? Because that might kind of be like, I need food. And like it's kind of a rational way of asking, what do you like about it? Whereas it's tell me some of the things you like, that kind of leaves a little more open-ended, a little more likely to get kind of a richer response there. So those are the open-ended questions, kind of how to think about structuring those conversations that you might have in terms of customer discovery. For the interviewing tips itself, whether you're doing focus groups, whether you're doing just kind of a roundtable, a conversation with several customers or potential customers, making sure that you are building rapport. This is something that people often want to sort of skip over because you're passionate about what is you're there to talk about. You want to get into the details of maybe your business idea, but making sure that there's this rapport actually goes a long way in getting those richer, deeper responses. So I always tell my clients, which, they might say, do we need to ask that at the beginning? That's sort of a easy, question. I don't know if we really need that. It's not necessarily for the data collection aspect, but it is for building that rapport and making people feel comfortable, getting them in the habit of answering, in an open-ended way with some sort of information. So sometimes you are introducing yourself, you're getting a little bit of information about them personally. Because I do a lot of food and beverage research, that's often like who's in your household. Could be something like, what do your grocery shopping habits look like? Are you going all the time, every day? Do you go like once a week? What are you trying to do? To get them kind of talking about something that might be tangentially related, but isn't necessarily like the first, kind of data collection question you want to ask.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. The other thing is, making sure, of course, that you're including everyone in the conversation, especially if you're in a focus group. If you're doing a focus group, you have, maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. If you've got 6 people around the table in an hour, they've each got like 10 minutes. They don't have very long to speak. And you want to make sure that, everyone is being heard. And there's a reason that you have, more than one person there probably. So just making sure that you're kind of including everyone. There are people just kind of have these tendencies to either really share what their opinions are, they want to be heard. Other people might not speak up quite as much. So looking out for that. Staying on purpose, this is kind of an art of directing people back to the key research objective, why you're there, the feedback that you want to get from them. Um, Maintaining positive regard. Sometimes people share sort of outlandish ideas or things that seem kind of far-fetched for you. There is the, kind of internal response of like, huh, I can't believe they said they put hot sauce on that. That's really strange. I had that happen, while moderating back in my Heinz days about hot sauce. But as a moderator, the goal is to say like, tell me more about when did you start doing that? Like, I want to understand that a little bit better. It's not a judgment response, even though, internally you might think that's really weird that they put hot sauce on that. So maintain positive regard. Stay on purpose, as I mentioned, but flow with the conversation. The respondents or the customers you're talking to they don't have your questions in front of them. They're not like going through, this isn't a survey. That's kind of the point. It's more open-ended than that. So you can kind of follow where they're going. If some question you asked took them down a certain path, it might be really rich to understand how they related those concepts, why they went that way, why when you ask them about grocery shopping, did they start talking about daycare? How are those things related? So just making sure that you're kind of not being too rigid with the questions that you've written out in the first place. Don't put words in their mouth. That's kind of like putting part of the question in the answer. You can restate for clarity if you're like, I think I heard you say, and just making sure, confirming that you really understand, but making sure that you're not, just kind of putting words fully in their mouth. Probing for clarity, that's sort of I talked about with the why, making sure that you're sort of there in the moment, listening actively and probing for clarity when possible, because sometimes you might already be thinking about the next question you want to ask, and you might miss a chance to say, oh, I'm not actually sure. They said that they really care about convenience, but is that like the time it takes them to get to the grocery store or the time it takes them to make the meal? Going back, looking at your notes or you're listening to your recording, you might not know if you don't probe in the moment and kind of listen actively and follow up with those questions. And then the last one is bolded. It's really important and it's really hard to do. That's live with the silence. So naturally, we want to fill gaps in conversation. That's very social, that's very conversational. But when you're doing customer research, you just want their opinion. So you're trying to talk less and listen more. And so that sometimes means just putting your question out there and letting them formulate their thoughts. This is probably new to them. They don't necessarily have a question or an answer at the ready. So give them a minute to get there. And respondents will generally fill those gaps of silence. And it's better to hear what they have to say and to listen to, what they fill those gaps of silence with than to keep talking yourself. I also wanted to dive into concept research in a little bit more detail. So because it's so important to entrepreneurship and thinking about business development, concepts are around to answer the what's in it for me, the customer, and why should I believe it? It's a way to kind of put the idea on paper. Some of you may already be doing concept work. Some of you may not need to do it, but the idea is to kind of concisely state what it is you're offering, to be able to explain to customers very quickly what they're going to get out of it. That's the benefit and why they should believe it. There are reasons to believe. They're supported by, different things. Could be something supporting a reason to believe, like a scientific claim or truth about your offering, or it could be something that it's really well reviewed, and that's why you should believe that you're going to get what I'm saying you're going to get. But concept research can be qualitative, it can be quantitative. And so like I said, it's a big part of like business development. So here's some tips for thinking about concept research. When you are trying to better define what the idea is, you can do concept research, understanding the importance of the idea. Like once you have a concept on paper, you can get reactions from customers. What do they think about the idea? I'm going to go through some ways to get reactions, some questions you can ask. If you're further along and you're thinking about communicating the idea, this this type of research can help you understand what are those key reasons, those benefits that you can be communicating, and what are those reasons to believe that you can be communicating. What do people need to hear? Yeah.
I'm just wondering what exactly is the concept research?
Yeah.
And what is the research topic or something?
Yeah, so it can be, like I said, qualitative, quantitative. There can be different ways to approach it. The concept is essentially the business idea written down on paper. It's saying, this is a software package available to small businesses to better handle their taxes. And 9 out of 10 professionals prefer it because so there's like a reason to believe that it'll work for you. So it's kind of a laying out of the idea and going through in each stage and saying, this is why this idea exists at all. This is why it's right for small business owners in this case. And this is the reason that small business owners might be interested in it. So the concept is kind of like the idea or the offering, whether it's a product or a service, on one piece of paper. It's a way to concisely, say, here's what it is and why customers would care about it. And then concept research following that is taking that idea, that concisely written idea, and getting feedback on it. So it could be that you go out and you have a focus group or you have an in-depth interview with one customer or potential customer and say, here's the idea, what do you think about it? You might have more than one concept because you might say, like, in this one, we positioned it this way and we talked about it this way. The same tax software, we could say that it is really good at doing this and that and the other thing. I don't know anything about tax software, so I'm not sure why I picked that example, but you could say, here are the benefits of it, and we talk about it this way. Here's the same product. Here are the benefits of it. We talk about them a little bit differently. We call out different reasons that they might be important to end customers, and then get feedback on which one resonates. What are they taking away from that? Whether they, what's most strongly kind of coming across. And then, like I said, the fact that it can be qualitative or quantitative in later stages when you're already like, this is a pretty refined idea. I don't have as many questions about how to talk about it. It feels like this is pretty much the idea on a page. The quantitative can come in to help you validate, is that, I heard from talking to people that it sounds appealing and interesting, but maybe I need to now know how many people, how many small business owners need this, how many care about this, and that's where the quantitative comes into play. And then, so that's where, like, at the end there. Oh, yeah.
Sign on. So when we make the prototypes and we test it out with users, so we call that as testing. So, but going on, if we are testing the concept that we have made, then that would be concept testing. So what will it be? Will it be testing or will it be concept testing?
So you're saying when you have a product that you're like,
we have made the prototypes, we have made it on Figma, for
mm-hmm,
example, and we want to test it out if it's working or not.
mm-hmm,
If people are liking the way the flow is going on.
yeah.
So, will that be called testing or will it be called concept testing?
I'd say testing or like user experience testing. It is a little bit different than concept testing, which is more conceptual. Sometimes there's like if it's a service, there's less likely to be something they can do. If it's a product, there might be like a prototype that you can bring to concept testing that can kind of get an idea of what it is. So it's a little different. I think what you're talking about is more testing. It's already kind of something they can go through and give you some specific concrete feedback on what's working, what's not working. Yeah. This might also help. So should have switched to this in the first place and trying to define the concept. So the idea on a page, the concept, is that insight. This is where you are basically stating, in as concisely as possible, what is relevant and meaningful to your target customers about your idea. And then the benefit is you saying, I know that this is important to you because XYZ. And then the reason to believe is, have I given you enough of a reason? Have I given you enough information to believe? Because sometimes something might sound really promising. It might sound really great. And I might be, as a consumer, all in on that product. I want it. But I can't imagine that that's really possible. That can't possibly come to market. So you might have to prove that it can come to market with new developments. There's new technology. There's things that you can mention as a reason to believe to help customers understand that truly we've developed this and it can, come to market. So those are the pieces that you're kind of probing around, testing around. In qualitative concept research, when you're working on that business idea, the questions here are, not all the questions you might want to ask, but just a way to kind of explore those different things on the last slide, the insight, the benefit, the reasons to believe with customers. So believable relates back to that reason to believe, getting a sense of how believable is this idea to you? Does it make sense? How so? Tell me if this seems possible or far-fetched. Like I said, you might, talk to customers who say, like, I'd love that if you could provide that solution. That sounds great. I've tried other things that claim to do the same and nothing's ever panned out though. So, I go back to just I fall back on my own methods of doing it. I have workarounds that are acceptable. So just kind of working through, does it make sense? What else could I tell you to help you understand and believe this idea? The relevance is, that insight part. Is this speaking to you as a customer? What does it mean to you? How important is something like this to you? How could it fit into your life? So sometimes when you're doing development work and research, you might have customers that you're talking to about a product, your service, your idea, and they might say, "Yeah, I think I know someone who could use that." And you're like, "Well, I thought you were my potential customer. I want you to be excited about using it." So trying to drill into what are the reasons that works for someone else, but you yourself, you personally wouldn't use it, or don't think it's compelling. Help me understand why that would work for someone, but not for you, so that you can get a better figure out how to make it more relevant and compelling for that customer that you're talking to. And then the last two kind of buckets are uniqueness and motivating. So the uniqueness is really about that competitive landscape, understanding where the idea fits into other products or services that customers might be currently using. Uh, is what you're working on different? Is it set apart from those other things? How is it different so that you can really hone in on those differences, those points of differentiation in communication, or when you're talking about development plans? How can you make sure that you're really leaning into those points of difference and not becoming another, this is like another product that is highly competitive with something else on the market. And then the motivating. I think in the, it might be natural to ask questions like, how much do you like it? How much do you dislike it? Like, tell me about that. But these ideas kind of give you a richer response where you get like, what pulls you towards this idea? So you can hear in their own language, what's compelling about it? What's speaking to you? What pushes you away? And then also in terms of motivating, here's where you can collect some data on the message that they might need to hear about the offering. Do they need to know more about it? What else do you want to know? What do you need to understand more clearly so that as you get, depending on where you are, if you're gathering that information in the first place, you're making sure to kind of incorporate that into the idea. Or if it's kind of further along, it might be something that you need to have in communications as you go to market and tell customers about it. Yeah.
Um, just trying to understand the difference between research and the research phase and the development phase.
Mm-hmm.
So in the research phase, you basically have the one page inside or offering concisely written, and you're just trying to gather the exploratory data around that, asking very open-ended questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then in development, you've taken a broad spectrum and narrowed down and built a product, or
Mm-hmm.
getting closer to building a product and then you're testing?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Essentially, in the research, you will find that when you go to put something down, kind of in on one page, they might say like, oh, we could do this or we could do that. We could have this feature or benefit, but do we need to? And, so you can kind of write maybe 6 different ways the same idea on paper. And that research, that more exploratory phase can help you narrow down what really is important among those different ideas that you're considering, among the different benefits or features that you could offer, which ones matter to customers. And which ones are more differentiated? Do they have solutions for some of those things already? They don't need that feature from you, things like that. And then the development, like I said, you're kind of narrowed down. You might still have a couple questions, things you're trying to fine tune. You kind of don't have as many, you're not creating like 6 different ways of writing the same idea, but you've got like 1 or 2. Maybe you still have some questions that are that you're fine tuning, but it's just not quite as wide open in terms of decisions you're trying to make and things you could do and directions.
Because in the research phase, you're suggesting that we can be open-ended and be like, I had no one have a service that can address 7 or 8 different needs.
Hmm.
And ask questions around all of it, and then that helped me narrow down which one need I believe would make the most benefit, and then ask questions around that.
Right. Right. Exactly. A lot of times there are different ways to communicate the benefits of something. You might say, like, it solves this need. It also solves that need. A lot more people are going to use it for this need, though. So, I'm going to talk about it that way. But if people also use it and, find it beneficial in that way, that's not a bad thing. But it gives you a sense of like, where's the market? What are the customers really going to gravitate more towards? It's a bigger opportunity. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And then some final considerations. All research, no matter what kind of research you're doing, just think about using consumer language, customer language, if there is any difference there. People might know more or less about the offering that you're coming to them with. So, sometimes, especially in technical development and things, there might be words that people just don't know yet and things that you want to communicate a benefit to them, but it might not be how they're used to talking about something. So avoid being too technical, make sure that they're kind of, if you are going into a technical concept, make sure that you're kind of bringing them along and that they understand. Sometimes your audience might also be very technical and they might know what you're talking about. You just kind of have to make sure you're speaking that same language. And then the focusing on one problem or question at a time. If you are going to do any customer discovery research, make sure that you're going back to that objective and it's single-minded and that you're not kind of trying to cram it all into one thing, that you know what you need to get out of the research that you're doing and what you'll do with it. And then also have fun. I think sometimes when you go through the list, you're like, okay, open-ended questions and I have to do this and that, and you might kind of get bogged down by trying to do all those things right. But at the end of the day, customer discovery is just really interesting. It's a chance to ask people about what you're working on and what you spend, a lot of your time thinking about. And it's guaranteed that you will learn something. Hopefully it's your objective. Hope you learn what you set out to learn and you can walk away saying, okay, I answered that question and now we can make this decision and move forward. But even if research goes awry, you are guaranteed to know more than you did before you started the research. You'll learn something, you'll think about your project a little differently and try to enjoy the experience. Try not to get too stressed out about doing everything exactly right. It is a fun process and it really is an interesting phase of research. And then finally, to leave you with some words of inspiration, hopefully, and encouragement. This is from a sociologist's point of view, but the idea that research is something that everyone can do and everyone ought to do. It's simply collecting information, thinking systematically about it. So, like I said, try not to be, too intimidated or overwhelmed. Think about it like I just need some more information, and I'm going to go and set up a project to talk to customers about those information needs that I have. I think that is, yeah, all the slides I wanted to share, but thank you. Kind of, yeah.
I had a question about the initial approach to customers when actually trying to start the interaction.
Mhm.
So usually like, that initial momentum like to make people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like people usually tend to like reject a bit like the salesman talk.
Mhm.
So and even like the process of introducing yourself, do you have any tips on that? Just to make that initial connection.
Yeah, you're right. It can come across as like, okay, what is this? What are they trying to get me to buy? Where is this going? I think, being yourself as much as possible, like this is what I always introduce myself first. Like, I'm a researcher. I'm just interested in understanding your thoughts and opinions. I'd like to know more about your thoughts. Anything that I can learn is going to help me in terms of my project, my development, my business, what I'm working on. So, kind of starting with introducing yourself, starting with a little bit of your aim of like just thoughts, opinions, no right, wrong answers, I think is helpful in saying this is, in many cases, it won't be totally objective. Like I can often say I'm a third party researcher. I'm not connected to this research. That probably isn't the case when you're, talking about your own business. But you can still say like, I'm doing some research to understand, the business a little bit better or your opinions a little bit more. And you can also so you start with that and then kind of a question that's relatively benign, something that's like, tell me about, whatever the category may be that you're interested in, like, tell me what you're doing today. I'm just interested in understanding that and trying to open the door that way.
Say like never to try to introduce yourself like spontaneously, like presenting you as a random person and then to properly introduce.
Yeah, I think it gives you some credibility to say, this is like, I'm doing research. I'm, just here to kind of collect thoughts, perceptions, opinions, beliefs, keep it very like, kind of open like that. And I think that's probably a better approach than like just asking some questions. I mean, there is also observational research where you might, be observing someone using like a kiosk at an airport and you're working on technology that could work on that. And you might say like, hey, I noticed you scanned this and not that. Like you might just kind of be probing about one thing in particular. But I do think, telling them that you're doing research, you're interested in their thoughts is helpful in setting credibility. Yeah.
I just wanted to add a comment to this, what you just answered. It's a great presentation. By the way, thank you. I'm Melanie Simcoe. I'm a program manager with Project Olympus. I work with Meredith and Grelly.
Yes.
And we have programs that we work specifically on customer discovery. So all of these things that Emily's talked about today are programs we dig a lot very deep into doing all of these types of things. And I just wanted to make one comment. Never underestimate power of like saying that you're from Carnegie Mellon, you're a Carnegie Mellon student, and really like lean into that affiliation, because that gives you a lot of credibility right off the bat. And so definitely use that as a Carnegie Mellon student when you're doing your customers.
Yes, that's a great call out. Because I can say I'm from Schmidt Market Research, but yeah, saying you're from
Has been good to me many times in the past.
yeah. That's great. Yeah.
Areas I struggle with is while doing a very simple question, while doing research or talking with someone, how do you record responses? How do you like break eye contact and your attention to write down the answers? Or do you ask them, can I record your conversation?
Yeah.
How many conversations are you going to record, right? So like
Yes. Yeah, I often do record the conversation. It is helpful for me in terms of no, I do find it there are some moderators who have like great shorthand. They can just say like, oh, that was a key point. I'm gonna, jot it down as we go and kind of write and look, make eye contact at the same time. I'm not great at that. So I do always record and I do always tell respondents that anyone I'm talking to, if you don't mind, I'd like to record this just for note-taking purposes, assure them this is not going to end up anywhere. I'm not going to post this anywhere. It's truly just for me, maybe for an analyst on my team to be able to listen to and take notes. And most of the time, I think I've rarely ever had someone say I'm not comfortable with that. They're generally like, that's fine. They know, that the purpose of the interview is research. And going back to kind of setting it up, I'm from CMU, I'm doing some research and giving them like, it's research. So I'd like to record it if possible. There are apps that help with that, and there are, and you can look at like voice recorder apps, a lot of the like iPhones have them already on there, like even the Notes app works. But I just recently downloaded like a voice recorder app and usually you can listen to things on, double time on the back end so that you're not like going through everything in live real time again. Helps a little bit. But the other thing is where possible, if it's appropriate, you can have a note taker with you. You might like invite people to a roundtable conversation and have a colleague sit next to you and like take notes for you in real time. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
The question about the slides about the grocery example.
Yeah.
So in that slide, you introduced that you should not ask a question with the answering the question, right? But actually in the like answer you gave, you say tell me something about the grocery, what you like in the grocery shopping. But actually that question a little bit vague, because I don't think you can get answer that you want in that question. And then if you are doing a survey on a specific topic, maybe you should ask something related to that, right?
Yes, if you're doing a survey, definitely you want to be more specific than that. If you're in qualitative research, like if you're one-on-one, interviewing someone or doing a focus group with, 4 or 6 people around the table, it's intentionally vague to see where the respondents take it. And then the idea of having your discussion guide, the series of questions you've written, would get sort of deeper and deeper and drill down into what it is. So you might be trying to get to their checkout experience. You might be trying to understand, how do they think about self-checkout, what's available at Giant Eagle today, and do they use it? Do they like it? That sort of thing. But to start in your discussion guide, you want to say, what do you like about grocery shopping? See if anyone mentions that top of mind, understand how that kind of fits into their overall experience, and then kind of drill them down into what it is that you're looking for. But if you're doing survey research, you definitely want to be more direct about that. You want to give a lot more context and answers.
So I have a follow-up
Yeah.
question is that, what is the benefits of qualitative research? Because I think that, in my opinion, I think that quantitative research is, you can get more information on that, and
Yeah.
you can use some analysis tools on that. So,
Yeah.
what's the most beneficial thing you can get in qualitative research?
One of the biggest sort of benefits of starting, it's often like the first step followed by a quantitative validation of that. And it could go the other way too. But one of the biggest benefits of doing it in the first place is if you're writing a survey question and you want to make it close-ended, if you don't include the right responses, you will only have, you only get the data you get. If you say like, which of the following cell phone service providers do you use, and you include 4 providers, that's not a great example because you could easily look that up online and figure out who's in that market. But, if you're trying to write a survey question, you will write it based on what you already know. But if you do the qualitative research first, you will hear what other options people say, and you say, oh, okay, that needs to be in our response too. I wouldn't have included that. And a lot of times it comes more into if you're trying to write a close-ended survey question about why people do certain things or why they have certain beliefs, the reasons, you might know some of those, you have assumptions, you could write a question, but it might be pretty incomplete in terms of the close-ended response options you give them unless you hear first and just collect some information from people on like, what are their reasons for doing those things? So it can help you write survey questions too. Yes.
How do you recommend us to get people to participate in these type of interviews?
Yeah, so being a part of the CMU, being part of the Entrepreneurship College probably helps as a chance to post something on a bulletin board and say I'm doing, this research. I'd like some participants. But depends on it can be more difficult depending on what type of offering you're working on. If you're looking, at something very technical and you need to talk to only small business owners about software they're using, or financial service advisors, there's certain audiences that are a lot harder to reach. I would say the personal network goes a long way, and connecting with other students here, connecting with other folks within the college that can help you make those connections is a great starting point. There are firms out there that help, with more difficult, sort of harder to reach respondents, but that's not cheap. So that wouldn't be my first, first choice, but it sort of depends on the audience you're trying to reach. But ideally, keeping it simple and not, not working too hard, especially in the exploratory phase, to go out and spend a lot of money on like recruiting specific people is obviously not what you want to do. Yeah. Did you have a question in the back row? No. Okay. Glad I saw it. Oh, thank you. One second. I'll do that and then I'll come back. Can I?
I have one.
Sure.
How do you prioritize feedback from quantitative analysis?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Can we probe or get a little more context? If there's anything I should be doing on this computer.
Next question. Strategies that reach out to customers in order to conduct research such as cold.
Mm-hmm. Kind of your question about how to recruit. Yeah, getting those email addresses, especially if you're doing qualitative research, you don't need a huge response rate. Networking through the contacts here at the college is a great way to, that kind of depends though on whether they'll be the right, end user or potential customer.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh. Go ahead.
It's not being picked up. Maybe. Just because I'm on Zoom. Oh, now it's done. Okay. All right, thank you.
Technology, so helpful, and yet sometimes. Do you want me to see if I can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Matt, can you unmute and ask your questions?
Hello, could you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Emily. First off, great presentation. I really enjoyed it. The one question that I had for you is, when you're conducting customer interviews and surveys, a lot of times they have the frame of reference of what's currently in the market or what they currently use. But if you have a product that's different than what is currently out there, especially if it's like a tech product that's like innovative, how do you get some pretty good feedback for your survey as opposed to comparing to something that might not be like for like?
Yeah, I think it is okay and appropriate and useful to set context sometimes if you're doing an interview or if you're doing focus groups. And even if it's a survey that you're writing, to write a couple sentences to set that context, to tell respondents what it is that you are talking about, that you're working with. It happens a lot where we have to say, like, here's the current state that you're familiar with. What we're talking about are new options that, we're considering that would approach this in a very different way. Or, this is still in development. You can say this is very early stage. It's still in development, but the idea would be to solve for X, or, whatever it is that you can already say is definitely appropriate to set that context and share that information. But you're right, it is something that sometimes there are new products out there that consumers have a really hard time kind of getting their head around and giving feedback on, because they're so new and different. This is the Henry Ford quote about the consumers. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have told me faster horses, which does happen. And I will say too, if that's the case, it's helpful to set context and give as much information as you can. And it's also helpful, I think, to still understand what is currently happening. What are they currently doing? A lot of times for that newer to the world innovation, there are already workarounds going on, or, people kind of settling for solutions that they just don't envision. They're kind of indifferent to, like, that's just how I have to do it because there isn't any other way to do it. So when you hear that type of language or those type of comments, it gives you a sense that, there is a door open there for some innovation to come into play. Yes.
You touched on that briefly, but I just wanted to follow up on, before you get to the actual being able to ask questions by network. To get like these emails, these contacts, have you ever used like an email scraper or things of that nature, or any recommendations on that initial reach out beyond, like, as you mentioned, the networking, those kind of?
Yeah. It's not something that I have had experience using personally. We often have, in my role, like customer lists that we're using for established clients and things. So no, I don't know. Yeah. Any other questions in room, online? Oh, well, thank you so much. Thanks for your engagement. So fun to be here. I forgot.